Welcome to the final part in our Building Wordle series. In the first two parts, we used test-driven development to build out our game logic. Now that we have all of that logic in place, we're going to build a UI around it using React. Now, if you're familiar with React, some parts of this may not be particularly useful to you, but I think you'll be interested to see how we can take our logic that currently doesn't know anything about React and connect that with our React UI in a loosely coupled and flexible way. And we're going to be doing that with a custom hook. So I'll put a couple of timestamps here, and you can jump around if you're interested in getting right to the custom hook part. So let's get started. As you know, this is a Create React App project, so we already have a basic app component here. I'm going to run yarn start in our terminal here so that we can see what we're working with. And as you can see, it's a very basic Create React App starting page. So what we have here in our app component is a div with a header in it. I'm going to drop the header for now, and we're going to start with some basic component building blocks. And really in Wordle, our main component here is an individual guess. So we can have a guess component here. At its very basic, we're going to have a word that this component displays, right? Something like this, where we pass it the word. Eventually, we'll also pass it a score, but let's just start with this guess. So down here, we can create a new guess component, and we know in our props that it will take a word. And in our guess props, we'll just have word that is a string for now. So we're going to return a div here. I'm going to paste in some CSS, and I know there's going to be a couple of classes that I want to put in here. So I'm just going to set up an array where I can join those classes together. In here, for starters, we can just put our word. If I save that and we come back to the browser, we can see our word is just being printed on the page there. That makes sense. But really, we probably want to split each letter and put it in its own block. Let's do word.split, and we'll just split it on the individual characters, and then we can map out each letter here. What we can do is, we've got a div, let's give it a key. In here, of course, we'll just put the letter. And we'll get rid of this other word down here, and then let's give it some class names here. For now, I think letter will be the only class name that we need, but I'm going to use the same syntax for this because I think later on we're going to need to change the style based on the score. So let's save that, and of course right now these are just displayed vertically because these are divs. But let's get some styling here. If I pop open our file browser here, I think we can see we're importing this app.css file. So I'm just going to delete what we have in this file, and then I'm going to paste in some other CSS. Now, CSS, not my area of expertise, but you can see the way this works is we're going to have each guess is filled with letters, and then depending on whether the letter is a correct letter, an almost letter, or an incorrect letter, we have different colors that we give it. We also have a couple of states here for when the guess is inactive, meaning it's not the guess that we're currently working on. It's one of the future ones that we haven't gotten to yet, or when a guess is invalid, which would mean that the word that we've typed in is not a valid word. This is one thing we can do to give our user a little bit of feedback up front before they actually hit enter. With that styling in place, if we come back, we can see we have a styled word. Let's play around with a couple of the different variations of this guess that we need. So we know that we could also have a guess with a score. Let's go ahead and add that as a property. And then we also know that we're going to have guesses that the word has not yet been put in. So it's an empty string. And I think we'll have to make sure that is 4 characters. We can say that this is active is false. And then I think there's one more state that we want to plan for, and that is when valid is false. The situation here where valid is false is this word is not in the dictionary, or it doesn't pass our validation function really. So let's play around with those 4 values. If we come back to our web page, you can see we're using a bunch of props that are not expected. So let's add those in here. So the score is going to be Wordle.word score, did we call it? I can't remember. My autocomplete is not helping me here. So let's go ahead and import star from Wordle. So now we can say Wordle.guess score. That's what it was. And then we know we have active as a Boolean, and we also have valid. Now, not all of these are required. Actually, word is the only required one. So I'm going to make score and active and valid all optional props. So let's see, score and active and valid. And I think valid we should default to true. All right, so let's deal with the score first. The score is going to be useful when we add classes to our letter here. So I think if there is a score, then we want to add the score as the class. So if there's a score, then we can just get the score at the index, otherwise an empty string will be fine. And I think if we save that, we can see already that we do have one of our words scored correctly. So that looks kind of cool, right? Okay, so this empty row should be a little bit of a lighter gray because it's not the currently active row. So I'm gonna break the class of my top level div into multiple lines here. And let's say if this is active, then nothing. But if it's not active, we want to add the inactive class. Maybe let's make active default to true. Cool. So now that one is a lighter gray. And then the other one that we have is valid. And so if it is valid, there'll be no class. Otherwise, let's set this to invalid. And nice. In that case, we have red letters for that word. So we know that this is an invalid word. Great. So now we have a working guess component. This covers all 4 of the different states for our game. I guess the one other thing that we could think about is what happens if we're in the middle of typing a word. So for example, if our first guess here was just WO, we only get WO, but we only get 2 boxes. And so we can tell that one of the expectations of guess here is that word will have 4 letters in it. Now, actually, we could solve that here within the guess by saying word equals a word dot pad end 4 spaces. Now this looks good again. And that probably means with this other empty guess that we can just pass an empty string and that will still look good. Cool. I think that's a good thing to do there. We have the actual UI, or the representation of our game, looking pretty good so far. Even though it's not functional, we could actually represent an entire game with the guess component that we've created here. But now we need to add some UX on top of that. We need to add some interactability. For that, we're going to use a hook. When it comes to interactions here, there's 2 things that we need to think about. We need to think about state management, and we need to think about side effects. We need to manage our game state as the user plays through the game. A useState hook is going to be great for that. We also need to manage some side effects, which is the key presses as the user is typing in their guess. So to manage both those side effects and the state, we're going to create our own custom hook. And this custom hook, I think, is a pretty powerful example of a really important concept with this type of project. We have a representation of our game that is what we created in the last 2 videos. It's just the data about the game. It has a good API for managing and playing the game, but it's really just an abstract thing with like arrays of guesses and scores. Then we have what we've just created in React. We have this guess component, which is really good at representing a guess or a game in a visual way that our user can understand and appreciate and interact with. And so the hook kind of sits in between these 2 representations of the game. The hook is the adapter that allows our components to interact with the game and the game to inform what the components are showing. So let's take a look at creating a custom hook. I'm going to do it up at the top here, and I think the obvious name is useWordl. We're going to have to set a return value for this at some point, but for now, we don't really care. Let's think about the state management concerns first. we're already importing React here, but I like to just import the useState hook by itself. While I'm up here, I know I'm going to need useCallback and useEffect as well. And let's store some state. So the first thing obviously we know we need is a game. So we'll have game and set game, and this will be a useState hook. As our initial value for the state, we want to actually create our game. So we know we have Wordle.createGame. We need to pass it a dictionary, an answer, and a Boolean representing hard mode. We'll come back to creating our dictionary in a bit, but for the moment, let's just create a words array that has a couple of words. That will be our dictionary for the moment. So we'll set words as our value here. We can also set words at 2 for our answer for now, and let's set true. So we are going to play in hard mode. Now, not all of our state is managed inside of the game. We have the current guess that the user is typing, and that state isn't into the game yet. And we also want to keep track of whether that current guess is valid or not. The idea here is once they type all 4 letters, we want to immediately turn that red if it's not a valid guess before they hit enter. So let's go ahead and track those 2 values as well. So we have our guess and we have a set guess function here. For now, we can just set that to an empty string, of course. And then we also have our valid value, and we'll have set valid. And for this, we will default to true. Now, we kind of want to be able to set the guess and to set valid at once. We never want those to be set independently. Every time they type a new letter and we add it to the guess, we need to check to see are all 4 letters there, and therefore should we validate it? And if it is validated, is that true or false? So let's write a wrapper for that. So we'll have our set guess wrapper here. And I kind of don't like the name set guess wrapper. I would rather just call it set guess. So I'm going to call this one underscore set guess, kind of as a convention, underscore meaning you don't want to directly use that value or that function. There's probably another way to do it. We're going to use a use callback here, and this will take our guess. And of course, the first thing we'll do is underscore set guess. We also want to set valid. I suppose we could also call this underscore set valid because you're never supposed to directly use that function. So we'll use the same convention there. There's 2 ways that a word could be valid. If the word is not yet the length of the max word length, which is in our case 4, then we want to just consider it valid. Guess.length is not the same as game.max word length, then it's true. Or if they are the same, meaning the guess is the full length, then let's set Wordle.validate guess, and we'll pass in our guess and our game. We are getting yelled at by TypeScript here, so let's make sure we add our game as a dependency there. So now we have a way of managing our game state. Let's take a look at managing our game side effects. Underneath here, we're going to have a use effect. This is going to be simple. We'll do window.addEventListener, and we want to listen for a key down event. And we don't have a function for this yet, but we're going to create a handle key down function. Now let's make sure we are a good scout and clean this up when our component unmounts. So we'll say window.remove event listener, and we will remove that event listener in our callback here. So now let's create our handle key down function. So I guess this is going to have to use some values from our state. So we'll have our use callback here, and this is going to take some kind of event. Before I forget, let's put handle key down into our use effect dependency list. So what do we want to do? Well, for the moment, let's just console.log e and see what that event looks like. To actually wire this up, let's go ahead and call useWordl in our component down here. So I'm going to pop open my console here, and if I start typing ASDF, you can see our keyboard events are being logged. So looks like what we care about here is the key. That's a nice easy way to get the letter that we're pressing. If I press numbers, I get numbers as the key value there. Cool. What happens if I hit backspace or delete on a Mac keyboard, but we do get backspace, and the whole key is backspace. So we'll have to plan for that. And then also if I hit enter, we get enter. So those are the events that we need to think about in our handle key down. So let's start by pulling out the key. So we'll just call it character. We'll make sure we lowercase that. And now I think we'll have a couple of if statements here. So we know the first one might be if the character is actually the word enter. And in this case, we're going to validate and submit the guess. Else if here can be if the character actually is backspace. We need to actually remove the last character in the guess. Our final else if here is if the character is something we want to add to the guess. Now, we don't just want to add anything that's not enter or backspace, because we need to make sure it is actually an alphabetic character. So we're probably going to have some kind of helper function called isLetter. We also want to make sure that the guess length is less than the game.max word length. The idea here is that it's possible that the user keeps typing letters after they hit the 4-character length, and so we would just want to ignore any of those letters. But if the guess is less than the max word length, then we will add it. Let's go ahead and add our isLetter function up here. This should be a pretty simple regular expression. I guess we just want to make sure that this is a single letter, so we'll have our starting and ending anchors, and then in here it's got to be something between A and Z, and we can do .test character, and that will return a boolean. This is, I guess, the easiest one to do. We can just do set guess, we take the existing guess, and we add our character to that. It looks like I need to add a few things to our dependency array, game, guess, and set guess. All right, now to actually test this out, we need to return something from our hook. So it's pretty typical to return an array of values. I guess you could do an object, but I like the array syntax for a hook. All of the state really is stuff that we're gonna need. We need the game to show the history of guesses. We need the guess to show the current guess. We need valid to show the validity of the current guess as well. So let's just return game, guess, and valid. And then down here, we can actually get those values. So now we need to start doing something with these. Let's just remove some of this stuff. We'll have a single guess record here. We'll put our guess there. and we'll also put valid in. Now notice we get a type error here. And the problem is that string or Boolean or game is not assignable to type string. So word here needs to be a string, but they're saying a guess could be a string or a Boolean or a game. The problem here is that when we create an array of a string, a Boolean, or a game, TypeScript default assumes that the array will be an array of any of those values. But that's not exactly what we're doing here. This is more like a tuple where we will always have the game first and the string second and the Boolean third. Let's set the return value for our hook here. Wordle.game, and we'll set string as the second and Boolean as the third. And now these three values will be typed correctly. Game is a game, guess is a string, valid is a Boolean. Nice. And now we don't have any complaints here. If we head back to our browser, let's see what happens. I should be able to start typing here. And as you can see, I can. So let's work on backspace first and then enter. This should be fairly straightforward for backspace. We can do a set guess, and we'll set the guess to guess.slice, and we'll do 0 to -1. So we'll just take off the last character. So let's test that. Now if I hit backspace, look at that. I can type, and I think nice is in our dictionary, so nice will work, but mice does not work. It's invalid. Cool. All right, so let's work on our enter logic here, which is the last piece of our hook. We need to validate and submit. The nice thing about this is every time we change the guess, we're validating it right away. And so by the time we hit enter, we already have a value, our valid state, that tells us whether our guess state will be a valid guess. So we can just use that. We can say if valid, then let's set our game this time, and we're going to set it to Wordle make guess. And when you make a guess, we pass in our guess string and our game, and we know that returns a new game. So this will update our game object, and then we should also set our guess back to an empty string so that the current guess is now an empty string again, and we can update the UI accordingly. All right, so if we save this, what we should see now, let's type in a guess. How about nice, which we know is in our dictionary. If I hit enter, that disappears, which is expected, right? When we submit our guess, we're not showing the past guesses yet. So we're just showing our current guess, which is now an empty string. If we do mice, that is an invalid guess. So when I hit enter, oh, that does disappear. Not what I expected. Let's add console.log here. We're gonna log the guess and we're gonna log valid. And let's see what's going on. Oh, you know what? I'm just noticing that we didn't add valid to our dependency array here, and valid defaults to true. So this callback is only ever seeing that first value. Let's see what we log here, but I suspect that might be it. So if I write mice and I hit enter, we are getting true, which shouldn't surprise me. All right, let's try adding valid to our array here. And now if we type mice and hit enter, nice, we don't get anything. But if we change it to nice, great. So I think our hook is done. And now we can focus on rendering our whole game, multiple guess components based on the state of game. So let's think about this for a sec. There are three types of rows that we want to show. We want to show previous guesses that have been scored at the top. Then we want to show our current guess, which we're actively working on in the middle. And then underneath that are any guesses that are upcoming in the future. So those are the inactive grayed out rows that kind of just represent how many guesses we have left. So let's start with those empty rows. So I'm going to create an empty rows variable here, and let's create an array that has game.guesses remaining -1. And the reason we're doing -1 is basically that 1 represents the active row. Now, before we can map over an array, we do have to put some value in it, and then we can map over this. We don't really care about the value, that's just going to be 0, but I will take the index and we'll use that as a key. So we'll say guess. The word is always just going to be an empty array, and I guess that's it. There's not much else to put here. Oh, we want to set active equal to false because active is defaulting to true. There we go. And now let's just render our empty rows down here. And if we come back to the browser, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guesses. Now, if we make a guess, if we put in tone, I hit enter, you can see we're not rendering completed guesses yet, so that's okay, but now we only have 5 rows. If I put in type and hit enter, you can see that it removes another row. Okay, so let's render those guesses that have already happened. So I think we can just do this inline. We'll do game.guesses. And in here, we're going to have a guess. We'll set the word equal to whatever the guess is. And then we can set the score equal to game.scores at the same index. So let's save this and give it a test run. So if we start with type and hit enter, nice, you can see that we still have 6 rows, which is good. Our active row changed to the second one here, and we're correctly rendering the first row. And we know this is the right score because we put in type, and cast here is the item at index 2, so there is a T. All right, let's try nice. We can see that it's considered invalid, and that's because we're playing in hard mode, and it doesn't have a T in it. So let's try, I think we have tone in our dictionary. And then of course we have cast. Ooh, now when we get the word correct, looks like we have a bit of a problem. So invalid array length. Yeah, this makes sense. What's going on is that we're trying to create an array here that has -1 items in it. So I think the easy thing to do here is do a math.max, and we will create an array with the maximum of either 0 or game guesses -1. And this way, I think we won't have that problem. So if we do type and tone and cast, cool. We do have one more active row. Notice that the other inactive rows are gone. That's good. They're gone because we set guesses remaining to 0 when we get it correct. So let's do this. Let's say if game.guesses remaining is greater than 0, then we render our active guess row, otherwise we don't. And if we refresh this, we can try that again. We can say nice and type, and I can't write type because I don't have a C in it, so we'll just go to cast directly, and perfect. Excellent, that is our game functionality. But the one last thing I want to show you here is one way to get a dictionary. Here's how we're going to do it. We're going to get a nice long list of 4-letter words, and if we go to, on a Mac anyway, user share dict. This is the directory that holds the words file, and the words file is actually your system dictionary. If we cat words, you can see that it's just a huge list of words, but I want to grep for words that are of a particular length. I want words that start with an A to Z, and if I just do this, actually, I want to show you just A to Z, and we anchor at the beginning and end, you can see that we just get individual letters because those are entries in the dictionary. So instead, I'm just going to search for this same 4 times, A to Z 4 times. Now we have a list of all the 4-letter words in the macOS dictionary. Now we want to put these into a JavaScript array. So we'll do while readLine, do echo $line. If you're not familiar with the command line, let me know. I would love to do some videos on that, but this will basically just print them as is. And now I want to print an opening double quote at the beginning and a closing double quote at the end and then a comma. And now we essentially have an array without the wrapper. So I'm going to pipe that to pb copy, which is copying to my system clipboard. Let's go ahead and create a new file here in our source called words.ts. I can paste that in, finish off the array at one end. We come to the top of the file. We can say const words equals the opening of the array at the other end. And then at the very bottom, I'm going to do export default words. And now let's go ahead and import words from words. And now we have a nice long list of words, and that can replace our other list. And instead of using words at index 2, I'm going to paste in a random function here. Let's rename this rand just to make it shorter. I guess the minimum we can default to 0, and the max will default to words.length -1. And I think we should just add a math.floor to this, otherwise this will not be a whole integer. So with that in place, we can just throw a rand in here in place of our index 2, and now we'll be getting a random number each time. And let's give it a try, shall we? We'll start with cast. How about boil? Okay, lure. Ooh, we're getting closer. Let's try pulp. Maybe it's a double L, pull. Ooh, not quite. We have one more guess. Let's try pulley, I guess. Nope. All right, so we do have a problem, which is if we get to the end and we haven't guessed it correctly, it doesn't tell us what the correct word is. Let's see right here. I don't know, let's make this pretty simple. We'll say if guesses remaining is not 0, then we'll render null. Otherwise, just throw a div here, and then we'll put another guess, and we'll set the word equal to game.answer, and then we'll set the score equal to an array of 4, where we just fill it with capital C's. So this doesn't really take into account whether or not we got it correct. It will show it either way, even if we did get it correct, but that's okay. And oh, look, you can see it renders, hey, you know what? That doesn't look too bad. I kind of like it. So Pulk, to be honest, not sure what that means. All right, well, this has been fun. Thank you guys for watching this series. I hope you've had some fun too, learned a few things about test-driven development, about using a hook as an adapter between your business logic and your React logic. If there's other things you learned from this, let me know in the comments. If you have ideas for other videos, let me know in the comments. But for now, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you later.